Hey everybody, this is Thunderhands. Welcome to the show. Today's show is Tracking and Survival Apache Style. Now, in my estimation, the best trackers on the planet are most likely the Apaches. They were the world's supreme trackers and they knew how to survive. I thought this would be a good topic for the reason that what's coming up soon in the world, well, considering what's coming up soon in the world, this might be a really good thing for people to know, and this could possibly save their lives. So I thought I would touch on that subject. Now, the Apache, again, like I say, was the supreme tracker, the supreme warrior, the supreme survivalist. He was at one with his surroundings. And you know, tracking is not only about survival, but it's about just having fun and being in oneness with Mother Earth and being awake and aware. It's a very spiritual thing. There are certain techniques that are taught and known only by the Apache people that allow you to use your senses to the extreme benefit, or to the extremes possible for your benefit. And by extremes, I mean using the senses like you've never used them before, realizing what they're all about and how in tune you can be with your surroundings on a spiritual level through the physical senses. It also has to do with knowing about certain plants, certain animals, what plants are medicinal, what plants are edible, the lay of the land. I mean, there are just so many things that are beneficial to a person if they know them, that will help them in their everyday life, help them to survive any coming catastrophic conditions that may or may not arise. It's most likely that they will arise with the way things are going in the world today. I did a lot of tracking as a boy in Arizona, and it was just kind of a natural thing for me to go out every day with my dog and sometimes with my friend and trek around the desert and mountains in the surrounding area of where I lived in Arizona, or the arid zone. There were so many animals like the hawk and the tarantula, and there were insects like the tarantula and the scorpion, and then there were reptiles like the lizards and snakes, and smaller insects, rodents. I mean, there were just all kinds of things that you could look for, and look for the imprint of their foot or track. And that's basically what tracking is all about, is looking for signs of something or someone and where they are headed, or where they are going to, or where they have been, and actually tracking them down. Tracking, I would say, is really an art form. It's an art form because you have to use, like I say, you have to use all your senses. You have to use your right brain and your left brain. But there's a lot of right brain intuitive stuff going on when you're doing tracking. And that's why the blue coats could never find an Apache. In fact, they had to hire an Apache to find an Apache because they had no concept back when they were tracking Geronimo or trying to find Geronimo and other Apache chiefs or warriors. When they were trying to find them, they had no concept of how these people thought, how they lived with the land, how much in oneness with the land they were, what kind of special powers they had. And they did have special powers. When I lived in Arizona and tracked as a young man, I picked up on the spirits of the land and learned many things about Apache tracking and other techniques that are basically considered secrets. But good trackers probably know them because most of the tracking techniques, although other tribes had great trackers and scouts, my favorite is the Apache because of where I lived, where I grew up, and what I know about them, and what I learned about them even later on in life. Now, the normal tourist, let's say, that would visit Arizona back when I was a kid would probably go out in the desert and, maybe do the camera thing, taking pictures and, oh, isn't that a beautiful mountain, and that type of thing. Or they would go out and think that they could take a hike out in the desert. Well, most of them didn't know what they were doing, and so a lot of them got lost, some died, some got caught in flash floods. They couldn't see the sign. That's what a tracker calls things that he sees. It could be scat from an animal, which is something that they can look at to determine what kind of animal it was, what they left on the ground. Scat, in other words, where they urinated, where they, left their droppings, that type of thing. And then they could look at footprints. Then they could look at, like, say for instance, the sidewinder, the snake, the sidewinder, which is a deadly snake in the Arizona region, has a very specific track of a swirling type pattern, almost like little waves coming into a beach. And so, you learn to identify different snakes. You learn to know where those snakes might be so that you could avoid those areas, what rocks they might be under, what little pits they might be in. Whenever you entered a cave, you were super careful. Say you were tracking a coyote and it went to its cave or whatever, we'd be very careful. But the bottom line here is that trackers know, see, feel a lot more than the normal person walking down the street that is oblivious to anything. And that can be a drawback for a tracker that lives in the city, because when you live in the city, you see the sign too. You see signs or the sign of mankind. And we call that an imprint. And that's something that is an imprint, as we all know, is an impression of what's left on the landscape or what's left in the sand or what's left anywhere. And when you go around a bus stop, say in a city, a large city, where there's a lot of people on the streets, when you look down at the sidewalk and you see certain sign, it doesn't make you very happy, because the sign that you see is disgusting. It's man's imprint in the city, and the imprint that he leaves and the smells that he leaves. I'd say like a bus stop or a place where a person might hole up for the night is something that you don't really want to experience. So that's what I'm saying. Living in a city And if anything happens in a city, survival will be something that you will want to know how to do. Take, for instance, let's just take one thing, for example. Let's take water, because that's the main concern for anybody that lives in a city. If it shuts down, if the city shuts down, and there is no water, there is no food on the shelves of supermarkets. You can't go in and buy bottled water. You can't turn on the tap and get water because everything is shut down. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Have you thought about that? Because you can survive 3 days without water. That's it, folks. 3 days. So what would most people be doing in a situation like that? Well, panicking, of course. I mean, if they didn't have water stored up, or if they didn't have a plan, then it would be Katie bar the door. In other words, they would die. In the desert, you had to learn where the water was. There were certain cacti, whatever you want to say, that you could get water from. There were areas where you could look for water. Now, in the city, I'm going to give you a little secret here, and that it's just one thing that you should know. I mean, there's many things that you should know. I mean, half the people that get lost and freeze to death and all this stuff out in the forest could survive easily, very, very easily. I mean, it's a crying shame, really, that people don't know things. But let's take water, for example, and this is a lifesaver. Now, one way to get water, if you're in a city and everything goes down, this is how you do it. You dig a 3-foot deep hole, okay? A 3-foot deep hole and a 3-foot wide, 2-foot wide, however, right around 2 or 3 feet wide, 3 feet deep. And you get a garbage bag, which probably there's 100,000 of them laying around, or will be anyway, despite any kind of event. And what you do is you weigh the garbage bag down, you put it over the hole, and at the bottom of the hole you put some kind of container. I don't care whether it's a paper cup or anything you can find. You put a container at the bottom of this 3-foot hole, and you put the garbage bag on the top of the hole, and then you funnel it down to the container, and at the bottom of the funnel you make a little hole, and you weight down the garbage bag around the hole, the circular hole that you dug, with rocks or whatever, and you leave it out overnight. Condensation, folks, happens every night. Doesn't matter where you are, there's dew in the air that forms, and it is called condensation. And what do you think happens? Well, the condensation hits that trash bag or whatever you got there, that plastic bag, and it doesn't have to be a trash bag, it can be any kind of plastic. It rolls down through the funnel into the bottom of the cup, and in the morning you probably might have half a glass of water or maybe a full glass, depending. There you go. There's your water for the day to survive. Another way to get water is from plants. Like I said before, there's certain cactus that, when I was in Arizona, like the saguaro cactus, the ones you see that look like they have both their arms holding up, the big ones, and they're only found in certain areas of the Southwest, mostly Arizona. You can cut into them and suck on them like a rind type thing and get the water out of them and survive. And there's a lot of plants in the city that are succulents that have a lot of water in them. So these are things you should know. course, these are survival techniques. These aren't exactly like when you're tracking somebody or an animal or something, and you might have to do that too, and you might have to learn how to make traps. You might have to learn how to, it's always good to know how to track people too, because I've done that before when people get lost. You can even tell by their gait or the way they walk when they're getting tired, if if they're about ready to drop from exhaustion. You can tell just by looking at the tracks. And sometimes the tracks will start out more of a weaving pattern where they're staggering, or maybe a dragging one toe type pattern. You can almost tell how much change they have in their pockets by the pressure points of the way they walk and the depth of their imprint or their footprint or whatever. So there's a lot of different things. And then you have the other things like using your senses. And the Apaches had several different things that they used. In my book Emergence, there's a chapter called Teaching the Techniques that Thunder teaches to Robert and Natalie. And one of them is a wide angle type vision, and another one is being in presence. And both of these techniques are a technique that will help you become completely in tune with your surroundings, so that you can even hear like a bird in the bush exactly where it's coming from. You can almost hear critters crawling. In fact, you can hear them. You can hear, I mean, when you get right down to it, if you really tune in and lay down on the ground, you can even hear beetles crawling. So, I mean, that's how in tune with nature you can get. It's really kind of an unbelievable thing that people should know about, but they have no clue because they plod around day to day, stumbling around in their Brooks Brothers suits and wingtips, carrying their briefcase or whatever it is, and not even seeing the cracks in the sidewalk and tripping over them, I mean, it's pretty pathetic, really. Mankind is basically in a sleepwalk mode. He's not in tune with his surroundings. He wouldn't know if there was somebody lying in wait for him down the block. And that's another thing the Apache knew, is how to fight, how to survive, how to fight, how to take care of themselves. If they had to kill, they killed. I mean, that was the nature of the game back then. And, it could come to that again. If you're in a big city and everything goes down, it would behoove you to know how to fight. It would behoove you to know how to survive in a combat type attitude or stance, knowing a martial art, being, excelling at the martial art. And you can learn that martial art for health reasons, but also don't be misled by thinking that that's all you need to use it for, because there may come a time when you need to use it for something else. Of course, that's always a last resort, but in times coming it may have to be a first resort, depending on the situation. So this is all about survival. This is all about how to survive a horrific situation that is going to come upon people at one time or another, most likely. It looks like 99.9% chance that that's going to happen because of the way things are going in the world. Not to be doom and gloom, but let's just be realistic here, folks. Let's be realistic. For instance, how many canned goods do you have stored away? How much water do you have stored away? I mean, you can't go living, from living a modern life in your house in an air-conditioned environment or whatever to being outside like a homeless person is, they will probably be the ones to survive. And many of them won't, but a lot of them will be the ones that will survive. The ones that you look down on, or that people look down on now as dirty and sleeping in the bushes and that type of thing, they'll probably survive because they're used to being out there. But the person that's not used to being out there ain't going to make it, folks. Not unless they get their act in order. So you better get your act in order. And if you're going to do any kind of, let's say, well, a lot of people, they go up and they got their little yoga mats rolled up and they go upstairs and they do their yoga thing. Well, that's good. That's good. But, and that helps you get your body in shape. But you should be learning things that have to do with nature. You should be learning things that have to do with the outside environment. You should be learning tracking techniques. And there's a lot of ways you can learn. I teach them, and I'm teaching you right now. I just taught you one about water, and I told you about some more that are in my book Emergence. But there's other teachers. Tom Brown Jr., who was taught by an Apache and has one of the biggest tracking schools. He's the world's foremost tracker in my mind today. But there's a lot of ways you can learn about it. There's a lot of videos you should start educating yourself on tracking and make it fun. I mean, go out to the beach, and don't just walk on the beach, but look down closely at the sand. And guess what you'll see? It's more than likely that you'll see some kind of bird track. You will see all kinds of tracks. That's the best place to start if you're near a sandy area, is walk down the beach and see what you can see. You'll see dog footprints, and you'll see the gait with those footprints and how they are laying in the sand, and you'll see the footprint of the human, whether they're real deep and digging in or whether they walk light. It's a fun thing to do, and you can spot things like shells and where the tide has come up and receded. And I mean, there's just a million things that you can do. And the next thing you know is that you're in that natural world. You're communing with that natural world. And it's communing with you, and you're communing with the spirit that moves in all things. And that's very healing. It has nothing to do with the layers and layers of concrete and freeway and asphalt and buildings and all that crap that we got laying all over the land now. It doesn't have anything to do with that. It has to do with being in tune with nature. Being in tune with nature. The wind even smells different. You can feel the wind blowing. That's another technique. Being in presence, tuning into your senses, feeling everything. Not walking around with your senses dulled, turned off, switched off. No, you're walking around in attunement with nature. Now we turn off our senses because of where we live. In the cities, we don't like I spoke about earlier in one of my earlier shows, violence on our senses. We don't like that. We don't like the banging and crashing of the trash dumpsters and the beep, beep, beep of the cars backing up and the woo, woo, woo of the alarms going off on cars every 5 minutes and the rushing of traffic and it's just endless noise pollution. There's no way that you could hear water flowing or wind blowing, or there's no place to go to walk in the grass and feel it between your toes. I mean, that's what we have come to. That's what we have come to in this country. Basically, the people that came in here that removed the indigenous people of this land, or killed them all. That's where it all started. That's where, and they call this advanced civilization or technology or progress, manifest destiny, whatever you want to call it. Manifest death is what it is. A slow death for, all the inhabitants. Instead of getting out there and looking at the beauty of things and the sunsets and, the flowers and really tuning into the bugs even and the sound of a cricket. Mankind doesn't hear that anymore. He's got his iPods plugged into his ear or his cell phone up to his ear, radiating his ear. It's really kind of pathetic. So, there's a lot to be learned from the Apache tracking or any kind of tracking technique and, being able to survive or at least enjoy life a little bit more. Well, let's put it this way. You can enjoy life more and you can get ready for anything that might be coming your way. So you have the best of both worlds there, I mean, people say, well, let's focus on the positive things. Okay, well, let's focus on tracking and being at one with nature and, enjoying the spirit that moves in all things, the creative force of the universe. Let's enjoy all that by learning tracking. But on the other hand, let's get ready for the doom and gloom, or whatever people want to call it, that might be coming down the road. So you're killing two birds with one stone, to use an old saying. So get with it. Don't just sit around and think about this. Get out and do it. Buy some of Tom Brown's books. Buy some of my books. Because I talk about this stuff all the time in my book Emergence. And listen to the wind speak from the heart. So, that's what you should be doing right now. And let me talk a little more about how in tune the Apache was. The Apache was incredible. I mean, they used all kinds of stealth, all kinds of camouflage, all kinds of techniques because they had to, because they were hunted by the bluecoats. And so what they did is they used the land against the bluecoats. Sometimes an Apache would hide right before their very eyes and 2 feet away from, a bunch of bluecoats in a platoon or whatever they called it back then, coming through the pass or something, looking for the Apaches, or maybe not looking for the Apaches, and the Apaches would be under the sand. They would bury themselves in the sand so that they couldn't be seen, and they might be in a very barren landscape that looked just like, well, there's nothing out here. And then all of a sudden, when the cavalry came by or the bluecoats, they would rise up as if out of the dead, out of the grave, with weapons in hand, completely surrounding that particular party of bluecoats and just annihilate them, take them out in minutes, seconds. They didn't even know what hit them. And then they could run. An Apache could run for 80 miles. 80 miles. Think about running 80 miles in the Arizona desert. And they were trained this way from when they were very young. They, like the young boys, were taught to hold water in their mouth, put some water in their mouth, and run up to the top of a mountain, which may take a long time, and back down without swallowing that water. They were taught that their legs were their best friends. I mean, your legs were you when you were an Apache. They taught how to look at everything as an enemy if need be, and they used different things like animals because they knew, they felt that something was coming. And so they were just basically taught how to hunt really well, how to survive really well, how to know where every little spring was, or where every water hole was, where the shady parts of the land were. what they could eat and what they couldn't eat. And you know, there were people like Geronimo, Goyathle, one who yawns, and Lausanne, who was the sister of Victorio, great chief, leader of the Apache people. And Lausanne and Geronimo had special powers. They had special powers that I talked about before, the Da Gehogate, they got from their god Usen. Now Lausanne, I mean, Victorio always took her on raiding parties because she could hold out her arms. She could stand on top of a mountain or a little boulder or something, and she could hold out her arms, and by the feeling that she got on her arms, she would tell Victorio exactly how many of the enemy were tracking them and how far away they were and what direction they were in. And this is something that she nailed every time because she had these powers. And Geronimo had the same powers because there was a time he was holed up in the mountains and he all of a sudden rose up and said, they're attacking the stronghold back where his people were camped. We have to go back immediately. And sure enough, they were attacking the stronghold. So it is even said that he stopped the sunrise for a few seconds so that they could escape in the darkness. Now, historians have said this, okay? This isn't something I made up. And when they tracked Geronimo with 9,000 people, he disappeared into the rocks, into the Gon. He asked the Gon spirits to help him. So you can believe these things or not, but when you start getting into tracking, they're more believable. They're more believable because you realize that there is nothing that we can't do as far as shape-shifting and energy shifting and becoming one with, because it's all molecular structure. But I'm not going to get into that. I'll leave that to the scientists. So these techniques with tracking are unlimited. They are things that, you can use to help yourself survive any kind of critical situation. So combine that with the martial arts or the Eastern arts, and combine that with, knowledge of firearms or any kind of weapon, and combine that with, a combination of all these things. And I've studied all these things. So that's why I'm talking about them, because I enjoy talking about them and I enjoy passing on knowledge and wisdom about these things. I'd like to do it at seminars, but that remains to be seen. So I'll do it here. But the thing is, people, you want to know this stuff. You want to be like the Apache. You want to be a good tracker. You want to be a good survivalist. You want to be able to live off the land. You want to get back to Mother Nature, Earth Mother, Grandfather Sky. The Lakota call it Wakantanka or Tunkashila, and the Apache call it Usen. So, you need to get in tune. The Hopi call it the Holy Wind. You want to get in tune with all these things so that you can be a survivor. And hey, it's fun. It's fun. I mean, it's better than, watching TV. It's better than going down to the corner Pilates or whatever they call it, the yoga thing. Well, that's all good. I know yoga too. I studied that for years and years and years. But let's not just get caught up in something that's not, really going to help you in the future. I mean, sure, learn all that, but include everything. There's plenty of room in your life to learn this, and you should learn it. Thunder's saying learn this because you need to. So Apache tracking, and I have a website called Apache Tracking also. And that's, linked to my Native American Taoist, TAOIST.com, Native American Taoist, and Spirit of Crazy Horse. I mean, I have several websites that you can go to, and maybe I'll try to put all the links on here to them. The ones you can buy my books at, the ones you can donate at. If you feel like you want to donate, feel like this information's worth anything, you should donate. Could save your life. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up this show right now because it's getting near that time. And click on that link to the right, or the links that I will put on here to the right for some of the different websites I mentioned, and you'll find all kinds of things on there that are beneficial. Like, say, Apache Tracker, that website, there's a search engine on there where you can type in different things and find a lot of this stuff. So do that. Stay safe, and until I see you again, as the Mexican people say, adios.